Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the privilege is mine once again to rise in this august chamber on behalf of the people of Dennery North to contribute to a debate on a matter of tremendous importance to not just my constituents, but to the people of St. Lucia. But before I delve into the substantive motion, Mr. Speaker, like other presenters this morning, I would crave your indulgence to express condolences to the family of Pastor Cornelius Emmanuel, who maybe 1 or 2 years ago served as the Seventh-day Adventist district pastor for the Dennery Basin. And even prior to serving our community as a pastor, I would have interacted with him, Mr. Speaker, on the sports committee of District 5 when we both were teachers. And so today I must, on behalf of my constituents in Dennery North, express condolences to his family, in particular his wife at the Human Services Department. Mr. Speaker, I will also crave your indulgence to express condolences to the Matura Valto family in my constituency. As you probably know, we lost a very influential member of our community roughly a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. And there are several other families in the constituency that have lost loved ones in recent times, in particular in Olio and Dennery Riviere. Miss Edna in Grand Ravine, condolences to her husband, Mr. Rodney, and family. And only on Sunday, Mr. Speaker, the entire Dennery Basin was plunged into mourning when news broke that a young man had met his untimely demise in an accident in Miku. He was only 25 years. And I believe, Mr. Speaker, the time has come for us as parliamentarians, for the government, and all key stakeholder agencies, namely the Road Transport Board, the Department of Transport, the various biker clubs, traffic department, etc., to begin to fashion policy and to find a mechanism that would minimize the number of deaths we have on the road involving motorcycle users. And Mr. Speaker, I want to say categorically that I am not in any way whatsoever ascribing blame to the motorcyclist. What is painful for us as family members, as parliamentarians, as members of the community, is that we are losing too many of our young people on the roads in those accidents. And so I believe the time has come for us to begin to put policies in place that would minimize the number of persons meeting their demise. Mr. Speaker, I will not stand in the way of measures which, on the surface, appear to be improving the health system of our country. However, as the leader of the opposition before me, I will ask questions on behalf of the people of Dennery North when I have to. I will document the concerns of the people of Dennery North when I have to. And I will call for greater stakeholder participation, Mr. Speaker, when I believe there is a need for greater stakeholder participation. And participation beyond just a phone call, but participation that is characterized and defined by objective discussion. Participation, Mr. Speaker, that would allow us to put the people of St. Lucia first, as we've always done ever since the World Health Organization declared that a pandemic was upon us. Mr. Speaker, the government must make allowances for alternative viewpoints in this COVID discussion. And we should never, ever make the mistake, Mr. Speaker. We should not, or we should resist the temptation to look at COVID in isolation when healthcare or an aspect of healthcare is being discussed in this country. Yes, we've come here to borrow $30 million US as a response to COVID. But in any effective health system, you cannot look at one aspect in isolation of other factors, Mr. Speaker. Every year, Mr. Speaker, nearly 6 million people in developing countries die from low quality health care. Free, accessible to citizens. We ought not to gloat about that, Mr. Speaker. It is an imperative, and we also being told that it is beginning to border on human rights. And we have a situation in this country, Mr. Speaker, where those who can afford will live on. The poor and the marginalized, Mr. Speaker, will continue to hold the short end of the stick. And if your resources can allow you, Mr. Speaker, to hop on an aircraft or be airlifted when you are confronted with a serious situation, you will live, Mr. Speaker, and those who cannot may have to suffer. We see all the time on social media where platforms are littered with flyers, barbecues, donation sheets, and people are looking to raise funds to meet their healthcare needs, Mr. Speaker. And so whereas the discussion is on COVID, or the motion before us deals with borrowing for COVID, we would be setting a very dangerous precedent to look at COVID in isolation. And I was relieved, Mr. Speaker, when I heard the Prime Minister in his preamble speak to the public health response plan. Now, I would have been happy to have had that plan at my disposal to peruse and to critically examine to make a more informed contribution to the debate today. But I will have to take it for what it is. And when I hear of a public health response plan, Mr. Speaker, I am inclined to believe that this is not just restricted to COVID, but we are looking at the public health system as a whole. And so it is for this reason today, another opportunity, Mr. Speaker, presents itself for me to put forward a case for the Larry Seuss Health Center. COVID, and if we are to seriously get to the bottom of COVID, Mr. Speaker, the existing health facilities and systems have to be functioning at their optimum. But what COVID has done is that it has exacerbated a problem that existed prior, Mr. Speaker. It has stretched us. We have a healthcare system today that is overwhelmed. And in spite of all the challenges that COVID poses to us as a country, Mr. Speaker, we have to laud the healthcare professionals in our system. The doctors, the nurses, and the support personnel at the hospitals and elsewhere. Mr. Speaker, the impact of COVID is well documented the world over. Countries have been affected across the globe, large and small, rich and poor. And as a result of COVID, people have had to change the way they did things prior. Mr. Speaker, moi vle di jodi a that ma gwe gouvernement vini parlement jodi a pour prêter $30 millions américains pour adresser les affaires COVID et puis santé. Moi ka dit that gouvernement ka fait en l'air si nous prenons l'argent ça là et puis nous dépenser seulement en les COVID. Moi ka dit moi ka croire que l'argent ça là supposé taper dépenser pour adresser problème en système santé nous qui ka aller beyond COVID-19 et puis tous ces problèmes là ils jabanons. Mr. Speaker, we have been stretched. And amidst all the challenges, as I said, we have to take our hats off to the doctors and the nurses of this country. The leader of the opposition, moments before me, reiterated a point that we have made not just in the parliament but elsewhere, that the St. Lucia Labour Party and the parliamentary opposition, we have always provided support to the government on COVID. When the Prime Minister took to the Parliament to announce the state of emergency, Mr. Speaker, we could have assumed a posture to try and block the initiative. We could have had a disposition where we were not going to cooperate. But we said, out of conscience and responsibility, that we would allow the government a free hand, because we believe, Mr. Speaker, at the time, that the intention of the government was to preserve lives and for the well-being of the people of St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, I have seen the impact of COVID in Dennery North. And I got a call from the Prime Minister roughly 4 weeks ago, when he told me that someone from my constituency had tested positive, and that there were concerns about Dennery North and the infiltration of our country by people through the back door. I did not put up resistance. Of course I had concerns that I raised with the Prime Minister. And today I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that the healthcare professionals, people from the Bureau of Health Education, and personnel from the Office of the Chief Medical Officer, the Office of the Chief Medical Officer, they have had a presence in constituency, and all they have received from the member for Dennery North, who happens to be a member of the St. Lucia Labour Party, is full cooperation and support. Because this is not about us, Mr. Speaker. And I made the point before. There are people in St. Lucian society today who have the means and the resources, and they can call an air ambulance in a matter of minutes, and they will find themselves in Miami, Martinique, or Barbados. But there are people in each of our constituencies who cannot afford that luxury. So that when we have a strengthened health system down here, or interventions to curb the spread of COVID, Mr. Speaker, it must receive the support of members opposite. And that has been our disposition from day one. But it is as if we are not supposed to come here and provide an alternative viewpoint. We have to acquiesce to everything that the government says. No, it can't be that way, Mr. Speaker. We represent people. As a collective opposition, we represent in excess of 37,000 people. But in matters of healthcare, it does not really matter to me whether it is the 47,000 who voted for us or other citizens who voted for the United Workers' Party. Healthcare is too important an issue, Mr. Speaker, for us to try and play politics with. And if you have a point of view that is not in concert with what the government is postulating, then you are labeled. And it was very disappointing this morning when the Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, at a time of crisis, when all we should be doing as responsible parliamentarians is to pull solutions together, resorted to such disparaging language to describe us on this side of the house. But you know what, Mr. Speaker? Our responsibility is to the people of St. Lucia, first and foremost. And that is why we will always continue to put St. Lucians first. Mr. Speaker, in that plan that the Prime Minister spoke of, we cannot, and I'm hoping we will not just look at the healthcare workers and the health system by itself. I spoke internally of the system where we should not be looking at COVID alone. And I'm going further to say that in order for us to enjoy and to make good on the policies that we're trying to implement with respect to COVID, there are other critical state agencies that have to be strengthened in order for us to see the results we're looking for as it relates to COVID. The healthcare professionals and the politicians on their own will not be able to achieve the desired results. And we have seen that the police have had a critical role to play in the last couple of days. And in that 30 million, with that 30 million US, and considering how critical a role that the police have to play, are we going to see, Mr. Speaker, once and for all, the rehabilitation of the Southern Divisional Headquarters of the Royal St. Lucia Police Force? And it's a genuine question, Mr. Speaker, because they too have been working some very stressful hours under very trying circumstances and in work conditions that are not at their best. So the question has to be asked, are we going to see improvements for them where that is concerned as an overall part, as a part of our overall COVID response mechanism? Mr. Speaker, we have seen at the level of community what stigmatization can do. And when news first broke of COVID, I'm one of those who was petrified. I'm one of those, Mr. Speaker, who was very apprehensive about what would have become of St. Lucia, especially when I saw what was coming out of Europe, Italy in particular. But it bothered me, Mr. Speaker, when constituents of mine would call and give me stories of what they had to endure on their way to work or at the workplace. And that because there was a case in one community in my constituency, people from that particular community who had ventured to work in other parts of the country were being discriminated against. For no reason they were being asked to stay home. They were being asked to go and get tested even when there was no suspicion, Mr. Speaker, that they had issues as it relates to COVID. There were people who were afraid. People were apprehensive. And sometimes we must never, ever overlook the psychological impact that these developments can have on the ordinary people in our communities. And I'm saying, with $30 million, US dollars, being borrowed or being loaned from the Caribbean Development Bank as part of the COVID response, are we going to see mechanisms, Mr. Speaker, that would bring some measure of comfort to some of the people I've mentioned? Today, Mr. Speaker, we find ourselves in a situation where nobody really anticipated what confronts St. Lucia. But there's merit, Mr. Speaker. There is merit. And today I feel vindicated by some of the pronouncements that we would have made as an opposition prior to what we have to endure as a country today. The challenges that COVID has thrown up in this country, those are not matters only for the government. COVID is not an issue only for the United Workers' Party. We all have a stake, and we all must be given a responsibility and an opportunity to actively and objectively participate in the discourse, Mr. Speaker. All of us. Because when we go into our respective constituency offices, we are the ones who are saddled. We are the ones inundated. We are the ones people come to complain to. And what about the displacement? People have lost their jobs. People have had to be placed on rotation. And it is hard for them, Mr. Speaker. Across sectors, earlier this morning, the member for Castries South spoke about hotel workers. They might be in the majority. But what about our children who are at home today as we speak? And I know the teachers are trying their best in terms of lesson delivery and instruction as a whole. We had the laptop computers for the children. Did we know COVID was coming? And I have said that giving a child a laptop computer is tantamount to a vaccine. You vaccinate a child at an early age in preparation for life, Mr. Speaker, down the road. Today, a laptop computer or a tablet is no longer a luxury item. It is a necessity. And I'm hoping that with this 40 million and the plans that the Prime Minister attempted to present earlier on, Mr. Speaker, we can find in 40 million US a laptop program that is more all-encompassing and that will reach more children in this country. Mr. Speaker, the banana farmers. So much has been said about the banana farmers in this country. And this morning we heard that the priority may not be to export anymore, but begin to brand the bananas. So that the 80,000 people who are coming from the UK will begin to see a label on a finger. But that is for another discussion, Mr. Speaker. That is for another discussion. So, Mr. Speaker, I am saying that, yes, COVID is on our doorsteps. Yes, we all have a responsibility. Yes, we need to thank and laud the healthcare professionals of this country. But very importantly, Mr. Speaker, the opposition as duly elected members of this parliament, have to be given opportunities to meaningfully participate in whatever policies or responses that are going to be fashioned for this country as we move forward. The road ahead will be a very difficult one. And anybody, whether it is in this parliament or elsewhere, who tries to give the impression, Mr. Speaker, that this is going to be a walk in the park, that this is going to be easy because some people in here are more competent than others, they are fooling us, Mr. Speaker, and they are not leveling with us. And that particular challenge, or the challenges that have been thrown up by COVID, will call for all 17 hands in this parliament to be on deck. And we have to go beyond the parliament and engage competent solutions to play their part in fashioning this response. At the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, it is not just people from one geographic part of this country who will suffer, but St. Lucians from as far as Grizzly in the north and Beaufort in the south will be impacted and will struggle as we move forward. And it is for us, as their representatives, Mr. Speaker, to fashion policies and programs that will bring about the sort of relief that they need. With those few words, Mr. Speaker, this concludes my presentation on this particular motion.